A reading from the Voice of the Silence. Point out the way, however dimly and lost among the host, as does the evening star to those who tread their path in darkness. Behold Migmar as in his crimson veils his eyes sweeps over slumbering earth. Behold the fiery aura of the hand of Lagpa, extended in protecting love over the heads of his ascetics. Both are now servants to Naima, left in his absence, silent watchers in the night. Yet both in Kalpa's past were bright Naimas, and may in future days again become two suns. Such are the falls and the rises of the karmic law in nature. Be, O Lanu, like them. Give light and comfort to the toiling pilgrim, and seek out him who knows still less than thou, who in his wretched desolation sits starving for the bread of wisdom and the bread which feeds the shadow, without a teacher, hope, or consolation, and let him hear the law. We give to you our own journey.
So today we will be looking at the esoteric symbolism of Mars, one of my favorite planets. And so there are a couple of themes connected with Mars, but we're not going to look at all of them, but some of the more significant or at least interesting ones that I've come across. The first is regarding Mars as a marshal of Fohat, which I found quite interesting because when you think of a marshal, you have a marshal as someone who is the head of, say, a military army, which links very much with Mars. And at the same time, you have the action of marshaling or like a gathering of forces. So it's here, Helen Valborg states that Mars carries forth the Fohatic creative energy that lies at the very root of manifestation. And in ruling Aries and Scorpio, it marshals this primordial force, which on the human level is good or evil, depending on the motivation, use, and level of concern for the agathon, universal good. Now, even though this is more speaking of Fohat on a macrocosmic level, we know that on a microcosmic level, Fohat is connected with Kundalini. So it sounds as if Mars, therefore, would be a marshal of both that force on a microcosmic scale and Fohat on a grander scale. But it makes you wonder, what exactly is this marshaller, so to speak, of Fohat? Is it some sort of divine will? That's a question that I had. Another statement made about Mars is that Mars isn't necessarily the source of motion, but rather the focus through which this motion, or it seems this divine breath, works, which again is another mystery as to what exactly Mars would be if we were to put a name on it. Here again, Helen Valborg states that Proclus put it succinctly when he wrote that Mars is the source of division and motion, separating the contrarieties of the universe, which he also perpetually excites and immutably preserves, in order that the world may be perfect and filled with forms of every kind. He is not the ultimate source of motion, but the focus, as it were, through which the divine breath throbs in the manifest world. Thinking about this on a microcosmic level again, the divine breath maybe could be correlated to the heart or the heartbeat in man, which obviously without the heart, one would die. And similarly, this divine breath in some ways has been described as a heartbeat of the universe, and in some ways connected with the absolute. So it makes you wonder, what is the focus through which the divine breath works? Again, it's difficult to put an exact name on this focal point, so to speak. But you're going to see throughout the other symbols connected with Mars that in some way, Mars is some kind of focuser or gatherer of forces, in a sense. So there is another very important theme connected with Mars, and that is sacrifice and the descent into manifestation. And that's because this manifested universe itself is, in a sense, a type of sacrifice, because it's spirit limiting itself to become matter, which is a type of sacrifice. So this links to the two zodiac signs that are connected with Mars, and that would be Aries and Scorpio. And interestingly enough, Aries is connected with spring and the month of March. And we know that spring could be connected with themes like creation, whereas Scorpio is connected with the fall period and hence death and disintegration. So we could find that both creation and destruction, in a sense, are tied to Mars. This also links to the symbolism of the Ram itself, which is obviously the symbol of Aries, one of the zodiac signs connected with Mars, because Mars rules Aries. Here it's stated by Helen Valborg that creation emerges only through an original sacrifice, and that its product can be preserved only through periodic sacrifice and recurrent war. So we've always heard about the ram, or the sacrificial ram in a sense, sometimes even sacrificial lamb. And again, this would symbolize the sacrifice that's needed for life to continue. So it seems like manifestation itself is a type of recurrent, ongoing war, particularly because there are two opposing forces that are always, in a sense, fighting between each other, whether we would want to say creative and destructive forces or centrifugal and centripetal forces. So Mars is very much an epitome of sacrifice. Also interesting to note is that with the symbolism of the the Ram is connected, at least Aries, rather, I should say, is connected with the Nidana. Because, you know, in Buddhism, there are 12 Nidanas, or we want to say links or chains, so to speak, of existence. And the first one is avidya, or ignorance. And this ignorance or avidya is again connected with what is needed for manifestation to occur. There needs to be some type of maya, so to speak, in order for manifested for the manifested worlds to come into being. Again, there's a link between Mars as it relates to Aries, or the Ram, in terms of a descent into manifestation as well, because here she says Mars represents forces propelling this immortal soul into an incarnated and limited condition, and that this immortal soul is represented by, specifically intuitive immortal soul, is represented by Mercury and Venus. So this brings to mind another question that I had, which is when it comes to what propels the intuitive immortal soul into incarnated and a limited condition, you would think that would be the thirst for life, or that this would in some way be connected with karma. Interestingly enough, Helen Valborg would have stated that there is a sort of connection between Aries, or Mars, and Kamadeva, or Eros. As we know, that we've always heard about the quote unquote desire that arose in it. But it seems like Mars may not necessarily be that desire, however, in some ways connected with it. This is something that has puzzled me, I should say, that I don't know what everyone else's take is on it. Another theme connected to this sacrifice or war would be the biblical theme of Cain slewing Abel, where in this case, H.P. Blavatsky actually stated that Cain is Mars, and Abel then can be seen as spirit in this example, in terms of the sacrifice that's needed for life. Because again, spirit becoming limited, or i.e., matter, this limitation, as said earlier, is a type of sacrifice. So you can see the connection again between Mars and this sacrifice which is needed for life. Interestingly, also, obviously, Cain and Abel would be brothers, and that connects to the symbolism of the twins, or Gemini. Additionally, it's interesting to note that it would have been stated that the idea of bloodshed is secondary in a sense to Mars, but it seems like the original thought behind Mars would have been the bloodshed from primordial conception. So it seems like sexual generation or generation is more a theme connected with Mars. And H.P. Blavatsky actually says in The Secret Doctrine, here quoted, that Adam, specifically Adam Cadman, is like Brahma and Mars, the symbol of the generative and creative power, typifying water and earth, an alchemical secret. So here we see that Mars is connected with generation and this creative power, whether it be the creative power on a macrocosmic level, again with creation, or on a microcosmic scale in the human body. Another theme connected with Mars is that of the dragon slayer, which is very important. But maybe dragon slayer might be a bit of a misnomer because usually the dragon is not necessarily slayed, but tamed in a sense or controlled. And that brings us to Kartikeya, who is really the Hindu form of the Greek god Ares or Mars. Here, H.P. Blavatsky gives a fairly decent explanation of Kartikeya's birth, which is quite bizarre on the surface of it, but nonetheless important. So she says that Kartikeya is born, but in a still more miraculous manner, begotten by neither father nor mother, but out of a seed of Rudra Shiva via Agni, who dropped it into the Ganges. Thus he is born from fire and water, a quote, boy bright as the sun and beautiful as the moon, end quote. Hence, he is called Agni Bhuva, Agni's son, and Ganja Putra, son of Ganges. So in this story regarding Kartikeya, it's additionally said that he slays this demon Taraka, if I'm pronouncing the word correctly. So you can see how he, in a sense, represents these, or at least would be the prototype for the various dragon slayers of different myths. On that note, that links him to the Archangel Michael, because we know of the story in the Bible of the Archangel Michael and his hosts fighting against Satan and his rebel angels, which interestingly enough would connect to the, seeing that this is the war in heaven, this would connect to the lighting up of Manas, or the, well, we could just say lighting up of Manas by the Manasaputras. So here, H.P. Blavatsky again says that the Pleiades, or Kritikas, are the nurses of Kartikeya, the god of war, who is called the commander of the celestial armies, or rather of the Siddhas, translated yogis in heaven and holy sages on the earth. The Siddha Sena, which would make Kartikeya identical with Michael, the leader of the celestial hosts, and like himself, a virgin Kumara. So what's interesting about this is that Michael and Kartikeya, even though in a sense as Mars they would be connected with generation or even sexual generation, they're described as Kumaras or virgins rather. So there's the interesting connection there. And also as a commander of these hosts, again, you can see the link between Mars as a sort of marshal, one that controls and gathers these various forces for the purposes of war. This then links us to another theme connected with Mars, in that it's been explicitly stated that he represents, in one sense, the central life force of the body, but we also know that he is connected with the generative or creative energy or power. So Helen Valborg states that he, Kartikeya, signifies the central life force ruling over and controlling all the other lesser life forces operating in nature and within the vestures of the human soul. So again, you see a link between this and the connection with the Archangel Michael and even Kartikeya, in that Kartikeya and the Archangel Michael, well, specifically when it comes to Archangel Michael, I should say, he's been shown as the leader of these hosts. And those hosts could be, in a sense, equated with these lesser life forces on a microcosmic level, and he representing the central life force. So again, you see the connection between this marshaling or commanding of forces. Additionally, which puzzled me a bit, was the statement that he is sort of a vesture of the flame, where she states that in coming into being, Kartikeya washed up on the earth in the Shara or Kashi reeds used in ancient times as arrows and spears. Like his weapons, he was a reed, a narthex reed, through which the flame of enlightenment descends. As such, he is the vesture of this flame, which passes through the 7 sections or chakras of the reed, awakening each center as it touches it. So, in connection with this narthex reed or reed, it immediately brings to mind the associations with Moses, for instance, who was said to be born in a basket, or again connected with this reed theme. Or you even think about Prometheus taking the heavenly fire in this narthex stalk. And this connects to the symbolism of the rod, which this reed or this rod, rather, is definitely connected with the central column in the human body. So you could see the connections here, especially with the what's been called the rod of the mysteries. So all of this is some complex symbolism, we should say. Another thing is Mars has been explicitly stated to be, well, at least Manipura, the chakra Manipura, is connected with Mars. You would think that, for instance, with Scorpio being one of the zodiac signs that is connected with Mars, Scorpio has always been shown as relating to the generative organs. So you would think Scorpio and Mars would connect more with the sacral chakra, but really it's seemingly by all respects more connected with Manipura. Here, Helen states that in man, the Manipura chakra, lying between the lumbar and the navel, is the center wherein the fiery gastric juices of digestion and food processing lay the foundation for the life force. This is the seat of Kartikeya or Mars, whose energy promotes growth and differentiation within the human microcosm, as in the greater cosmos. What's interesting with Manipura is the mantra of it is Ram, and it also actually depicts a ram, which is one of the totems. Well, it is the main totem of this chakram, as you could see in the image. I don't know how well you all can see. So there's a definite connection between Mars and this chakram. As you could see again, there's the ram, and also there's a few other symbols. So you see Shiva, specifically the more warlike, destructive aspect of Shiva, Shiva Rudra, rather. And you also see another deity who is, I thought at first she was Lakshmi, but it seems she is another goddess connected with this particular chakram. I don't know if goddess would be the right word to use, but you see that Shiva is actually seated on top of this lion, and it's been stated apparently that that lion represents the mind or manas under the influence of desires. So him sitting on top of this lion symbolizes him dominating this desire-filled mind, which is again very much connected with the theme of Mars and also its spiritual significance, as we're going to look at later on. Another thing, again connecting with willpower, is I've always heard that Manipura is connected with the will. Don't know how true that might be, but if that is the case, then again, it shows the connection in some way between willpower and Mars. But that's just a speculation of mine. And one last interesting connection with Manipura, seeing that this is the area where you can find, as she says, the fiery gastric juices of digestion and food processing, is how Krishna actually states in the Gita that he is this fiery life force in the gut. And hence, Bhavani Shankar states that this is the reason behind why one would usually sanctify meals before eating it. Another, and really the last important theme we're going to look at, would be spiritual archery as it connects to Mars. And so we saw earlier how obviously Mars is connected with war and this battle that occurs. And seeing that he is this commander of forces on a spiritual level, it seems like we're also to emulate Mars and be a commander of the forces within us, specifically our life energies, for the purpose of the spiritual or holy war, like Arjuna. So that's one connection as to the spiritual aspect of these stories. And we did see how Kartikeya and Archangel Michael and even Cain, that they all represent Mars, and that in connection with Cain, even though he slew his brother Abel and is a god of generation, like Kartikeya and Archangel Michael, he's described, well, not Cain, but Archangel Michael and Kartikeya specifically are described as being celibate. So we could see that even though he's a god of generation, celibacy or chastity is very much emphasized with Mars. And so I think that's very significant because as it concerns controlling our life forces, one of the ways in which we can scatter our forces would be the sexual function and also seemingly idle or frivolous talk, hence why silence has been emphasized. And as another interesting parallel, I believe it was Mahatma Gandhi who stated that he believes that a prerequisite for either it must have been, if not chastity, just the willpower in general. He says that there needs to be some control over the tongue, which obviously connects with digestion, which is again connected with Manipura and Mars. So it's just interesting all around the parallels. So regarding spiritual archery, it was stated by Helen Valborg that the positive power of Mars, released by the morally courageous ascetic, requires the persistent and patient training of the spiritual will. It involves the reinversion of the centrifugal process of division and proliferation, downward and outward, so that a kind of death of the ego takes place, to permit the birth of the regenerated and purified self, ready to enlist in the army of the voice. So again, will keeps coming up. At least it seems in emulating Mars in this divine battle, we need to cultivate this spiritual will. And immediately came to mind the article by Hit the Mark, the article by William Quan Judge, titled Hit the Mark, where he actually talks about the importance of spiritual archery. And he says that archery is a practice that symbolizes concentration. There's the archer, the arrow, the bow, and the target to be hit. To reach the mark, it is necessary to concentrate the mind, the eye, and the body upon many points at once, while at the same time the string must be let go without disturbing the aim. And obviously, concentration would involve, again, a sort of focusing of different energies into one singular aim, which is really needed in real life as it concerns wars and battles. The army, so to speak, has to be disciplined. There has to be a central focus that all of them marshal their energies towards. And so, again, it seems like on a microcosmic level, we are to emulate this via concentration and various other means. Another connection with the spiritual archery is renouncing this sense of I or self. This sounds like renouncing the, I don't know if maybe individuation would be the right word, but seeing that individuation is somewhat connected with this gaining of the sense of I. It also seems to link back to Mars, in that Mars is obviously involved with the descent into manifestation. And naturally, from this process, one is going to gain a sense of I, which is faulty. So there's a sort of undoing of this process that's needed in spiritual archery. Helen Valborg states that the renunciation of lesser loves and longings, self-regarding hopes and goals, and the very sense of self is required for the spiritual ascent. And you're going to find a confirmation of this by Sri Raghavan Iyer, as he states that in the practice of spiritual archery, one must forget oneself. One can do this meaningfully only if at the same time one remains spiritually awake. So it seems, at least to this student, that what is meant is one must become so absorbed in one's work, that there's a forgetting of the personal sense of I, which is something that seemingly persons on the real battlefield will have to experience at some point. And it brings to mind, therefore, karma yoga, because in karma yoga, it seems this is absolutely what's needed. So regarding preventing this loss of energy, or these scattered forces of energy, rather, again, we come back to the importance of controlling the speech as well as any other means by which this energy can be lost. Sri Raghavan Iyer says in his article, Buddhi Yoga and Swadharma, that the true yogin becomes deliberate in the exercise of mental and therefore uttered speech. He learns the art of what Damodar K. Mavalankar calls self-attenuation. Through this stripping away of inessentials, one becomes capable of maximizing one's every use of life energy. And Helen Valborg states that if men and women heroically struggle on the moral battlefield and take control over the lesser forces within, Mars is spiritually reborn in harmonious relation with Venus and Mercury, with the wisdom of sacrificial love and the light of noetic insight. So interestingly enough, I don't know if you all have noticed, but it seems like all of the various yogas tie into this spiritual archery, in that Raja Yoga is needed for the concentration aspect of spiritual archery. Devotion is connected with Bhakti Yoga, and there you have to have a sort of devotion or love, it seems, when it comes to spiritual archery. And additionally, Karma Yoga, in being able to lose oneself in one's work, so to speak, and in a sense, kill out this sense of I. So it's almost like all of the yogas come together harmoniously in spiritual archery. I thought it would be best to end on this quote from one of the Upanishads, and this actually came from William Kwan Judge's article, Hit the Mark, where he reproduced the quote. And it says, having taken the bow, the great weapon, let him place on it the arrow sharpened by devotion. Then, having drawn it with a thought directed to that which is, hit the mark, O friend, the indestructible. Om is the bow, the self is the arrow. Brahman is called its aim. It is to be hit by a man who is not thoughtless. And then, as the arrow becomes one with the target, he will become one with Brahman. Know him alone as the self, and leave off other words. He is the bridge of the immortal. Meditate on the self as Om. Hail to you that you may cross beyond the sea of darkness. So that ends the presentation. And if there are any questions, it would be great we could discuss. I don't know if you all can see. Can you see? Okay, yes, I'm back on. Raise this up. So were there any, oh, I see Nathan has his hand up. So yes, Nathan?
That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I cannot help but ask what you didn't speak about. because this is all about Mars, and this energy, this spiritual archery that you're talking about, is there's a certain kind of tension involved in, even the practice of spiritual archery involving the bow and the body somehow as an instrument for focusing on this divine, influx. It's almost like it's a bolt that comes down. And I think
Yes.
I think about, in the Taoist tradition, they speak of, the front part of the body is the yin part because it's the soft part, but the yang energy comes down, the Mars energy comes down and collects in the belly. So that makes me wonder, but we want to keep this. It's like when you talked about the breath at the very beginning. It's like this in-breathing and out-breathing. There's a continual relationship between the breathing in and the breathing out. And so that's what I wanted to ask you about, is like, what about do you have any ideas about the Venusian energy or the more the feminine energy in relation to this continuous readiness of spiritual, or of maintaining this continuous flow.
In regards to the feminine aspect, I know that that feminine aspect, like you said, would be connected with Venus. It's interesting because at least I know what the symbolism with Mars being the dragon slayer, the dragon itself has, at least according to H.P. Blavatsky, sorry, I always say HPV, has been associated with Venus or Jupiter. And yet I found it paradoxical because to me, it seemed like the dragon was almost like the negative aspect of Mars itself. So I feel like maybe Venus, or this Venusian energy, is possibly connected with Mars in that it is the energy to be controlled, maybe, by Mars in a sense, or not in a negative context, but I'm trying to think how Venus more ties in. That's a really good question with it. I know that.
I know you didn't talk about that, but I had to ask.
No, but I have to say, something else came to mind because Mercury and Venus, she stated, and I mean Helen, she said that they represent, in a sense, the intuitive, immortal soul. So maybe that aspect of Venus that's shown as the dragon is like the infernal aspect, and the divine aspect might be this Buddhic, higher nature. But how exactly it links to Mars is interesting. Maybe Mars is, in a sense, supposed to be this energy that serves this Venusian aspect, in its higher aspect at least. But I'm not 1000% sure how exactly Venus ties in with Mars.
Thank you.
I don't know. I think, was your hand up next, Robert? Or was it?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's in order. Oh, okay, yeah.
Yes, it was me. Oh, thank you so much. You seem like you practiced spiritual archery during your presentation. Yeah, you were in the act.
Okay.
That was very helpful. So, in fact, since the spiritual path is a path of war, it's actually a war path, Mahabharatan war. So it would seem that we definitely need Mars, right? That we could not succeed in the spiritual path without the influence of Mars. But I wondered, have you thought about how does that differ from aggression and violence, and how do you use Mars constructively?
It's a good question. How do we use Mars constructively? I think what you said was that violent aspect is like the negative aspect of Mars when that energy is not channeled constructively. So it's the same energy, it's neutral, but depending on seemingly how you apply it determines whether it's violence or whether it's for a holy cause, so to speak. So I think, and that maybe connects with Scorpio in that those persons can maybe be, in a sense, impetuous because they have too much energy and they don't consider the brash or possibly violent aspects of having all of this pent up energy. So I think it's mostly what you have as your aim. And if you are channeling your Martian energies in that direction, in other words, just trying to find, I guess, a healthy outlet for it. I think that's how you can prevent the violent use of Mars, so to speak. Any healthy outlet so that it doesn't build up and find a dangerous or violent, I guess, expression. That's my thought, at least. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts on it.
Do you think that everybody has to go through a stage of actual being part of the military and being a soldier or a commander in the evolutionary scheme?
That is a tough one. Do I think everybody has to be? Well, that's an interesting question. Never thought about that. But connecting that with the Kshatriya caste, seeing that every man has their own spiritual caste, so to speak. I don't know if you say caste or caste. Like some people say either. I I don't know. That's a question of, does one's dharma change each lifetime? Like, could this lifetime I be more allied with the kshatriya class, which is warlike, and another one be of the Brahmin caste, and another one Shudra? I really don't know the answer to that particular question, but I would think one doesn't necessarily have to go through it on the physical plane. I know that we could, in a sense, we all have to be kshatriyas in the sense of waging the spiritual war. That I know, but that's a good question. Does one's caste spiritually change depending on the different lifetime? Yes, I'm lost for words on that one.
Well, I was just curious what your opinion was. That's all.
Okay, that's a good one.
Hey, Journey, it looks like you've stimulated a lot of questions. Look at this.
I realize.
So I would just look what you did now. No, anyway, but why don't we just have it that each person just asks one question in as concise a way as they can, so that a lot of
Okay.
people can get in there.
Yes.
Is that okay, Nathan?
Shoot.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and then we have another question from the hall in here. So you'll be after me, Luca. Okay. All right, Judy.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I just wondered, the secret doctrine says Mars is currently in a state of pralaya, non-manifestation in its physical sense as a planet. Now, what significance does this have for us in the fourth round? Because although Mars seems to be at peace and asleep, we understand its energy to be the great challenge of war with the lower self on this plane. How does this work astrologically and astronomically together?
From what I do know about that topic, that seems to be one maybe more connected with initiation, because I remembered the controversy between Mars and Mercury, in that it was actually stated by William Quan Judge in one of his articles regarding this mystery of Mars and Mercury, that it is in a state of obscuration, like you said, and both of them, obviously, they're not part of our Earth chain of globes, but he stated that their obscuration is in connection with cycles, which is an occult mystery that most of us probably would not be able to, I guess, answer for the time being. So, in connection with how that affects us, seeing that Mars is in obscuration, that's something I don't have the exact answer to, as to how the obscuration of Mars would affect, I guess, our energies. I did see a statement that, for instance, the shifting of, I guess, the surface or the plates of Mars relates to these, the energy which Mars represents. This is what Helen Valborg had stated. I don't have the exact quote in mind. So it seems like the physical phenomenon that occurs on Mars does affect us, in some way, as it relates to the obscuration. What exactly that affects, I have no idea.
And another point on this would be that much of what the Theosophical astrology seems to be about is not the exact effect of one thing on another. It has to do with the symbolism itself, has to do with these archetypes, and learning to think archetypally, as your presentation did such a great job with, making these connections with mythology, Eastern and Western, and then it ties in with astronomy and so forth. And like you say, the plates, like Valborg's article, I could probably find that if you want, but
yes,
while you're taking other questions. But
yes.
Desiree.
Hi there, Journey.
Hi, Desiree.
That was beautiful. I learned a lot.
Thank you.
I learned quite a bit. And the imagery that you provided in the very beginning with the seasons in terms of March representing birth and then the Scorpio representing death made me think of the power of Shiva, the force of Shiva, both creative and destructive, and how those two are not negative, they're necessary. It's like an ongoing process. So I don't like the word negative, I just use necessary. But It also made me think of even a kite needs an opposing wind in order to rise. And like all of us, we need an opposition in order to build strength and to learn. So it's so necessary for that to happen, and not negative at all. And when I think of even a sailor on the sea, can't really hone their field, hone their skill unless they confront storms. They say a sailor isn't a sailor until he's confronted a few storms. And it's very, very true because they have to learn to navigate that opposition. So I think it's all just plain old necessary. But that was such a beautiful, beautiful presentation. And I especially appreciate your attention to detail and including all of the pictures and pulling out the symbols and giving that your full attention and love. Thank you, Journey.
Thank you as well, Desiree. And just a quick comment before you go to the next question, Jonathan, is I did see the statement regarding, I guess, life subsisting by the equilibrium of two contraries, relating to what Desiree was saying. So like she said, it seems like the war, so to speak, is necessary for life because these two contrary forces are needed. And if one overpowers the other, then bye-bye life. So, but
Yeah, just one other thing on that is that it just seems like the great symbol of will is the competition and the contrast. Notice how because the Bhagavad Gita seems to be all about will, and Arjuna is struggling with will, and Krishna is kind of challenging him in that way. And also, and interestingly enough, it's a dialogue. So you also have the number two there, like it's a dialogue between the higher and the lower self, you could say. So, and that also seems to have to do with the awakening of the will. So sometimes the number two gets kind of a bad rap in mysticism, but somehow it has to do with a symbol of the will, doesn't it? Though, Kirk, weren't you the next guy up? I thought. But well, we have
actually, I think Maluka was next.
Yeah, I think Maluka is the first.
I'm seeing a different thing. Okay, great.
It's weird that it's shifted.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah. Oh.
Hi, good afternoon. I was so delighted to hear what you have to say, and you are very intuitive. Good work. You're very intuitive, and I like that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Regarding Mars, I have a few notes because there is a book called A Secret Doctrine Dialogues. Have you ever read it?
I only read a little bit of it, not much, because I've been so focused on the smaller version transactions.
Yes, all of them. I mean, there's so many notes everywhere.
A lot.
A very peculiar planet. As Judy said, and HPV said that is it's actually getting ready to wake up, but she didn't say how soon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
And she also said that it's a very hostile planet. It's super hot during the daytime and very cold at nighttime. So I'm sorry about those people who are planning to do trips to Mars. I don't know what's happening. So, and the other thing that she said is that all the sacred planets, they're connected to our construction and, inspire whatever. It has to do with the formation of our evolution. They could feel everything that we do on Earth. Can you imagine how horrible?
Yes.
But the Earth doesn't feel what's happening in other planets. And she said that the Earth, unfortunately, is so sinful that cannot attract any moons. Because it was a question asked to her, how come Mars have two moons? And she said, well, because it's the stronger. It's like England when they took over, in another countries. And then she talked about Russia when Russia took another country that doesn't belong to them. She made that comparison, the stronger one. And as you know, Saturn it has so many moods because it's the most powerful. It attracts everything and turn it into, fire and storms and all kind of stuff. Very powerful. And this was proven because NASA have even videos of some of this activity in especially in Saturn. It just fascinating. So a lot of HPV teachings they are now into collaboration, and
Yeah.
science is in alignment with these teachings. Then the other thing I was going to say about Venus, because you mentioned HPV say that Venus is actually falling apart, and the planet of love and so beautiful. NASA actually have pictures and videos of that. It's a lot of volcanic activity. That's why they are not making it there. So and HPV said the reason Venus is so falling apart is because it's ready to move her principle, the seven principle, to another planet, just like the moon did to the Earth.
Oh, thank you.
Comment. Thank you so much.
What, you got something on this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Let's let Monica. She has something.
I wanted to ask you if it's interesting that Venus is brought up because thank you, Maluka. I wanted to ask if you had read or studied anything that gave the idea that Venus somehow with Mars has an effect that would make the difference between the violence that Mars is capable of, or better. In other words, do these two planets work together to bring about a cause and an effect that succeeds in eliminating violence, but keeping the strength and the love centered in any in any situation? You have anything like that?
I haven't explicitly come across anything concerning the connection with Venus and Mars in, I guess, reducing, like you said, violence and aggression. But seeing that Venus is a very, well, I guess, has a lot of beneficent influences, I would assume that in connection with Mars, there would be a betterment of the human condition, because I do know it was stated that there are holy beings on Mars. From Judge in his Hidden Hints in the Secret Doctrine, he talked about the brightness from this planet coming from these beings.
Yes.
And Venus seems to be connected in some way with the Buddhic part of man. So I would think it would cause a more beneficent, have a beneficent effect on mankind and help to reduce aggression. But have I explicitly seen anything on it? Not as of yet.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that the theosophical position on this is it's not the planets themselves actually affecting things.
Ah, yes, you're right.
It's the spirit of the planets, and especially, but even that's not really affecting things, because it's these planets represent something. They're symbols of something.
Yes.
True.
Of invisible realities in nature,
Yeah.
which are hierarchical and archetypal. And so this idea of actually Kirk Grudine, will let him talk, but in another presentation, he was talking about how the invisible sun is like the Atman, and the physical sun is like the prana. But then the Mercury is Buddhi, and the Venus is higher manas. But Mars is like the sacrificial descent into matter, and Journey could explain it better than I could. But and then remember, Journey, in the Valborg article where it talks about, I remember it saying Venus and Mercury are like the top of a triangle, of a downward pointed triangle, and Mars is the downward tip of the triangle
Yes,
into
it did
matter.
say that.
Remember
You're
that?
right.
And then at the end of the article, you quoted on one of your slides at the very, very end about, and I can't remember how it works, but it seemed like there was a harmonizing thing going on between
Hmm.
the planets. So if you remember
Yes.
that, then you could share it with us. But we've got a lot of other people. By the way, Nathan, are you going to try and do another question, or you got your hand up because you're doing a high five?
No, I've got another. If there's time, I have an
High
idea
five.
about
Okay, well,
Priestess Sophia and Mars.
okay, all right.
Let
Sounds
me
good.
just say thank you. It was a wonderful presentation, Jamie.
Thank you as well.
Thank you.
It's a
Beautiful.
pleasure.
Looks like Kirk Reading's up next.
Thanks,
Mhm.
thanks, Jonathan, and thank you so much, Journey. Really,
Yes.
very, very rich, and the whole multidimensional, mysterious aspect. I think you brought out so well. I think that one of the comments you made and the question you raised early on to me was a key. And you brought up the fact that Valborg links Mars to Fohat. And she does mention it in a couple, more than two places in that article. And you brought up the question, well, but she doesn't mention Kamadeva. But Fohat is inextricably bound up with what we call divine eros in the Greek tradition, and Kamadeva in the Hindu tradition, and divine compassion that we find in many traditions as being that overflowing empathy, sympathy, a divine love, which brings the manifestation into being from the unmanifest. And that's part of the connection that I see with Aries, right? Being at the very top of the cycle of descent. It's that overflowing compassion linked with Mars, and that makes the descent. It's that downward pointing triangle because it voluntarily is descending into evolution for the sake of the evolution of all souls, all immortal monads, and that and then the connection with Scorpio. The Scorpio is also linked with uh, the dividing of humanity from the androgyne into male and female. So you get that volatile a mixture and challenge, and the downward tending desire. So, but that in that descent through various stages, that which is a pure, compassionate, voluntary descent gets converted to corporeal passion. And then it becomes an opposition to evolution instead of participating with it, right? And he gets this attachment and clinging to embodied existence. And in Valberg's article there, she says at the end of one of these paragraphs, only by disentangling desire from the countless forms can it, referring to Mars, the energy of Mars, only by disentangling desire from the countless forms, it can take, there's misspelling there. It's two cans in the sentence. It can one can take it and purge it of selfishness and render it a worthy weapon for altruistic contemplation upon universal good and the supreme Godhead. So that perhaps that's why Mars is in obscuration, is because we're at this tipping point in which we have to convert the downward tending desires into altruism. And until that is done, we can't be activating the spiritual well until that shift, that fundamental shift, is made within humanity. So that seems to me to be one of the keys to Mars. And then also, the question that I had, though, because this was the opening reading from the Voice of the Silence, a very mysterious statement that behold Migmar, as in his crimson veils, his eye sweeps over slumbering earth. And this connection of both in Tibetan and Hindu astrology, Mars is connected with the eye, the all-seeing eye that sits over the pyramid and also in the symbolism of Avalokiteshvara, the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara, there's an eye in each hand. So you get the eye in the hand of that, great protection over humanity. So I was wondering maybe if you have any thoughts about that.
I have no thoughts except one, which was interesting. I found out that Manipura, which, as we know, is connected with Mars, surprisingly, it has been associated with the eye. And I do know that it was stated that yogis actually would focus sometimes on the center, as it was said by Patanjali, I believe, that focusing on the center gave one, I don't think it said like a sort of divine sight, but there was a connection between what Patanjali had written in the Yoga Sutras and Manipura, again, being connected with this divine eye. What I personally found that to be very mysterious. Even that they would have described this area by the navel as a sort of eye. Why exactly? That's a good question, but I don't have the answer for exactly why it's been described as an eye, and one that specifically Migmar or Mars as watching over the earth. Because if it's an obscuration, how could it? Like, are they referring to the forces from Mars or the beings on Mars? It's a really good question.
Well, every planet, like Jonathan was saying, would have at least a sevenfold dimension to it, right? So if you think of it as in relation to Kamadeva and divine compassion and those beings who do watch over and protect humanity from further and far greater misery and sorrow, right?
Yeah.
That is part of the protecting hand of Mercury, but it's connected with the eye in some mysterious way, that which watches over. Anyway, just some thoughts there.
Yes, thank you for that.
I have a thought on that. May not be the greatest one, but if the guardian wall is watching over humanity in a protecting kind of way, they are watching. How do you watch? You use your eye. And so, in other words, they're cognizant of what's going on, of all the vicissitudes of humanity. And also, within the human being, there's that watcher that is watching all the karma that we're going involved with, that is cognizant of all the vicissitudes and where. And there's that expression, the soul knows what it needs. So the kind of karma that it kind of allows the personalities to undergo is like a curriculum that the higher self is affording the lower self in life to participate in. So there's kind of a watcher. It's not a participant. It's almost like the two birds, or the higher bird who's watching. But it's not that the higher bird doesn't care. It's watching because it does care. So, but it has that perspective of not being too involved in matter. So these are just more thoughts. I don't know. So,
and a comment on that too, if there's
go for
time.
it.
What time do we end, by the way? Because I don't want to speak if somebody else.
You were very economical in your talk. You covered a lot of territory. So we actually have, in your time, it would be 8:45 would be.
Yes.
So,
8:45. Okay.
Oh, it's getting
so
there.
I'll make it short. I just wanted to say I found that some of the symbolism with Mars somewhat was conflated with Saturn or connected with Saturn in some way. And it's funny that you mentioned that watcher or that bird, which you would think is Atman, and connected with Atman, you would more think about, at least archetypally, not in the theosophical sense with how we have the different principles connected with different planets. But I found it interesting that Shiva would be connected, for instance, more with, say, at least in its symbolism, the absolute or even the divine breath. And yet you see Shiva seated in Manipura. And again, when you think of this divine watcher, you would think of Atman, again, as a supreme, similar to Shiva. And yet we're talking about Mars, which is not. So I don't know, there's some type of, it's like Mars is both spiritual and earthly. I don't know how to describe it, if I'm making any sense, but that was my only comment.
That's the vibe I'm picking up with your presentation and with Helen's article and all the writings of HPV. And the Atman has to do with the will too. So there's another connection. But we've got an Australian who's going to fix this whole situation from Melbourne. Did I get it right?
You got it right. Yeah, not Melbourne, but Melbourne. That's it. I want to thank you, Journey, for a wonderful lecture, and just say that you seem to have learned more in 3 years than I've learned in 30 years. so thanks for that. But just in the notes in the chat, I put a few pointers that I've come up with over those 30 years, I guess. So, which may be this other people have thoughts on if we have time. But that amongst the sacred planets, I've read that the rector of Mars, the ruler of Mars, so to speak, is the rector of globe F of the Earth chain of globes and has a special influence over the sixth root race of humanity. And as was hinted at by Kirk and others here, currently the planet is in obscuration, awaiting the beginning of the fourth round. Now, what I've heard is that this is not far away, and but when we say not far away in theosophical terms, that could be the next million years or so, that the incoming life wave will come on. But we do know that the planet will be inhabited, but whether they're on the same plane as we are, what we can observe at the moment scientifically, that is the shistas or remainders. Do you know what I mean by that? Yeah, would be existing on the planet now, and I wonder if we can find them there. That is, they are the seeds of life that remain from the previous round that stay there to provide the genetic material for the incoming life wave. So to save how would you say, the gods or the powers that be in Mars that are overseeing the development of the planet, to save them going through the whole business of evolving suitable bodies for the incoming entities, then we are told in theosophical literature there's such shista, which means remainder, the highest, if you like, representatives of the third round in Mars' case, remain there during the long period when the other entities are away. And so they will be there somewhere. And I often wonder, looking at the scientific literature, if they find any hints that they may be there. I put a few notes in the chat as well about what science has to say, a little summary there about what science has to say about Mars. But I guess the question I would say, and a very important question, is from theosophical literature that Mars may stand for an invisible planet. That's a hint that's given. Mars and Mercury, when amongst the sacred planets that are associated with the Earth, then the Moon stands for one, which is sort of like a receptacle of negative influences in the solar system, and the Sun stands for another planet which is close to the Sun, which we can't see at the moment, called Vulcan. But there's also a hint that Mars stands for another one. But it relates to what we're talking about here is what they call the outer rounds, which is a subject which relates to, how would you say, a bit beyond the spiritual pay grade of what's available in the literature, So with good reason for that.
Thank you,
So
Andrew.
I don't know whether you've got any thoughts about may stand for an invisible planet. What do you think?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was actually something that I thought about as well. You mentioned it, Vulcan. And interestingly, H.P. Blavatsky said in The Secret Doctrine that Mars is Vulcan. And yet I remembered explicitly hearing somewhere, where exactly, I don't know if it was in Transactions or where else, but she did say that Vulcan stood for this hidden planet. And like you brought up the moon as well, for this another hidden planet, which was interesting. That's really the only stuff that I've seen on it, but there's been no indication certainly about what exactly those hidden planets are or where exactly they are. But yes, I had heard that Vulcan specifically was another name for this hidden planet. And if she says Vulcan is Mars, then it sounds like maybe Mars may not be referred to, or is Mars what's also referred to? It's
These are all
interesting.
good questions. Only Dr. Spock knows.
Mhm.
Just somebody has to know these things. But Dr. Spock for sure would know. It comes from the shape of his ears. Anyway, Truth, go ahead. And I wanted to let Truth and Laura, go ahead. Wait.
I just
Laura,
looked
then
it up.
Truth, it looks like. Go ahead, Truth. You talking.
Vulcan traces to the ancient Roman god of fire, metalworking, and the forge. I'm just adding that to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a lot of Roman mythology tied in with Mars.
Yeah.
For sure.
A lot.
A lot. Laura?
Well, thank you so much, Journey. You brought to mind this idea of sacrifice. And when we look at the voice of the silence, it says there that Mars and Mercury used to be bright flaming suns, but because of karmic cycles, and you also mentioned the mystery of the cycles, they had to become the planets that they are today in our system. And so to go from being a sun to being a planet would be a sacrifice, we think it would.
Beautiful.
Thank you for that.
And that's in the part of the voice that's saying you don't have to be a sun, right? You can just do the best you can from where you are. And think about it. It's saying there's all these, it's using these occultism things, but saying that the suns and the planets, they change their roles. And so that's an interesting comment. I wanted to reward Nathan for being so patient. And he had something from the Pistis Sophia.
Nice.
And there's quite a few people here that love the Pistis Sophia. So what if we indulge Nathan?
Okay, well, really, I could just summarize by saying that the intuitive aspect that you bring to this work, Journey, that your study of Mars and you're sharing it with us. When you said that Mars is the marshal, Mars is the decisive element. Mars is what is the action, is the active element, but it depends upon the intuitive element. It rests upon the intuitive element, as I think evidenced by your presentation. We wouldn't have been able to receive this benefit if you hadn't been able to be so receptive. And so when we think about masculine and feminine, I know I'm not quoting from the Pistis Sophia, we can do that another time, but I always think about Mars as being related to the masculine and Venus being related to the feminine, and we seem to have an imbalance in these times. And okay, so that is what I will say, is that what HPB had to say in terms of the Pistis Sophia is that the feminine or women in particular are more spiritually suited for leadership because of their intuitive capacity. So sometimes throughout the history of, like, let's say the Roman Catholic Church in particular, right? Like they've been kind of set down. They couldn't be in the priesthood and all this sort of thing. But I think what does she say? Okay, I'll say the last thing that she say. She says, because the human soul, the monad, has no gender and reincarnates as both male and female across various lifetimes, Blavatsky argued that clamping spiritual authority to a single physical biological sex was an absurdity born of material ignorance. So, as we talk about Mars and we talk about the challenges of war in our time, and as we become spiritual warriors, let's just remember, like, what gives us the juice to be able to make the decision. It's the feminine that nourishes us and gives us real, that's a real food. So, okay, that's all I got.
Yeah, I'd like to just say something and then let Journey wrap this up with any final thoughts. Journey, what you've done is you've taken us into a really important topic in our time. We're in the Kali Yuga, so there's supposed to be a lot of lifetimes remaining in this Kali Yuga, a lot of even hundreds of thousands of years. Somehow we're going to have to get our head around this idea of war, because it's not probably going to go away. So we have to see, well, there must, and precisely as Nathan said, it has to do with, and as Kurt Gradine said, renouncing the desires. And as what you put in your talk, is renouncing these lower desires, renouncing the lower ego. That somehow opens things up so that the spiritual element can come into place. So it has to do with renunciation, discipline, concentration, all these things that you brought out in your amazing talk. But we're going to have to figure out this thing about war. I mean, other than war is bad, because that's not going to get it, it seems like. It does seem like it's an incredible precipitation of karma. It's almost like an organized precipitation of karma relative to helter skelter. But
what's worth fighting for.
Wow. And learning what's worth fighting for. And think about HPV. She wasn't, a wallflower. She took care of business. And she said it how it is. And she could be very polemical and warrior-like. So she must have, marshaled the Mars, or the Mars marshaled her, or whatever it is. So in order to fulfill this incredible role that she did, where she dealt with the problems of materialism and the superstitious religion and psychic powers getting out of control and so forth. Think about what she had to do, and obviously she invoked something about Mars in order to pull that off. So, Journey, do you have any concluding comments?
No concluding comments at the moment, except I know we weren't able to discuss the last quote on Om as it connects to the statement, and I think it's pronounced Mundukya or Mundaka Upanishad.
Yeah.
It would have been good to maybe bring as the overarching and final comment, I guess, the importance of the spiritual archery in regards to this war that you're seeing is very important. So we can hopefully try to remember in our day-to-day lives that we should be real spiritual archers and safely use this martial energy in order to wage this holy war against, I guess, our lower desires or our lower natures. And also, it would be very helpful to meditate on Om in that regard. But that's really the only comment I have. It was great having to hear all the comments from everybody. And I do have a lot of things to think about tonight after the different statements made. So I appreciate it. And thanks, everyone, for having me.
Thank you very much, Journey. So much.
Thank you, Journey. Lovely.
Yes. Thank you all as well.
Okay.
Bye. Enjoy your day.
Take care.
Yes.